In today's video, we examine the most horrifying moments in live TV history. From a cooking demo with fire safety sensors disabled, to a reporter covering a tropical storm on a steep hillside with dangerously soggy clay soil. It was May 9th, 2016, in Phoenix, Arizona. Afternoon temperatures reached the low 90s as traffic moved steadily through a busy commercial corridor. A local news crew was already live at a major intersection, filming from a narrow painted median left little separation from passing vehicles. Tamsin Gray was 29 years old, a community outreach coordinator who often agreed to live interviews because visibility mattered to her work. She believed showing conditions on site made safety issues harder to ignore, even when the setting itself carried risk. That afternoon segment focused on recent pedestrian fatalities and the city's failure to protect people at busy intersections. The interview location had been selected specifically for its visibility, positioned where viewers could see active traffic in the background. What it offered in visual impact, it lacked in practical safety. The median strip where Tamsin stood measured less than 4 feet wide, bordered on both sides by active travel lanes. The camera operator positioned himself close to the roadway edge, framing the shot to capture both Tamsin and the flowing traffic behind her. No physical barriers separated them from the vehicles passing just feet away. Traffic moved at posted speeds of 35 miles per hour, though some vehicles exceeded that limit. The interview began without incident, Tamsin gesturing toward the intersection as she explained the need for better pedestrian protections. Vehicle noise created a constant backdrop, requiring her to speak louder than normal. The crew had conducted similar roadside segments before without issue, and the familiarity bred a certain comfort with the inherent risks. A pickup truck drifted across the lane line. Witnesses later reported that the driver appeared to be reaching for something on the passenger seat, causing a momentary loss of attention. The vehicle's extended towing mirror clipped her shoulder, snapping her upper body sideways and driving her head into its path as it passed. The impact spun her off the narrow median and into the adjacent traffic lane. She fell hard onto the asphalt, disoriented and unable to regain her footing. Seconds later, a sedan traveling in the same direction entered the intersection. The driver had no time to react. The front bumper struck her pelvis and torso at approximately 40 miles per hour, the force throwing her body several feet forward before she came to rest on the pavement. Her head struck the concrete curb with significant force. Witnesses standing at the corner saw her body go still immediately after the second impact. The camera operator dropped his equipment as the live feed cut abruptly, then rushed toward her shouting for someone to call emergency services. Traffic in both directions came to a halt as bystanders moved to block the lanes. Blood began seeping beneath her head where the skull had fractured against the curb edge. She showed no signs of movement or respiration. Drivers exited their vehicles, some attempting to provide assistance while others directed traffic away from the scene. Emergency responders arrived within 6 minutes of the initial call. Paramedics found her unresponsive with agonal respirations and a rapidly fading pulse. Resuscitation attempts were made at the scene, but proved unsuccessful. The official cause of death was blunt force trauma resulting in catastrophic head injury, compounded by internal injuries sustained from the vehicle impact. The intersection was sealed off for nearly 3 hours as investigators documented the scene, measuring skid marks and interviewing witnesses. The camera equipment remained where it had fallen, continuing to record audio and partial visuals after the live broadcast was interrupted until the battery died. Both drivers involved remained at the scene and cooperated fully with the investigation. Tamsin Gray was pronounced dead at the scene, her body covered with a tarp until the medical examiner arrived. The live segment she had been filming, intended to prevent pedestrian deaths, instead became part of the evidence reviewed during the investigation. It was November 24th, 2017, when downtown Missouri prepared for its annual holiday parade under overcast skies with temperatures around 38 degrees. Light winds carried autumn leaves and diesel exhaust from the staging area where floats lined up. Families gathered along sidewalks in winter coats, holding flags while children pointed excitedly at the approaching procession. Local businesses sponsored elaborate displays, drawing thousands of spectators who had arrived early to secure prime viewing spots. Graham Holt, a 9-year-old in a local children's dance group, stood on the third float wearing a festive costume that shimmered in the gray light. Known for being compliant and attentive, Graham followed choreography precisely and rarely deviated from rehearsed movements. His quiet demeanor and listening skills made him reliable, able to execute routines exactly as taught. Teachers praised his focus and willingness to help younger students learn their steps. The float featured a rotating decorative platform showcasing young dancers performing synchronized movements. A portable generator powered the mechanism through electrical cables across the deck. The installation was completed hastily by volunteers with limited experience, leaving cables unsecured and creating unnoticed hazards during the brief morning safety walkthrough. The platform sat 16 inches above the main deck, creating minimal clearance beneath its edge where steel framing supported the mechanism. This gap could trap objects or body parts during rotation. The mechanism operated at constant speed with no emergency stop controls accessible to performers, with the power shutoff located only at the generator mounted behind the float. As the parade began, Graham took position near the float's center and began the opening sequence. Other children moved in formation while spectators cheered from packed sidewalks. The float rolled at 3 miles per hour, maintaining optimal viewing pace. Television cameras captured the colorful display for live broadcast coverage. During the second verse, Graham stepped backward and his ankle became entangled in a loose power cable that had shifted position. The cable wrapped around his ankle as he tried continuing the choreography, initially causing minor restriction. He worked through without breaking formation. When the platform completed its quarter turn, the cable tightened and pulled Graham toward the mechanism. He lost balance and fell, his costume becoming caught in the rotating platform assembly. As the float continued moving forward, the motor-operated platform remained in motion, tightening the cable and drawing more of his clothing into the rotating assembly with each turn. Graham's torso was pulled beneath the platform's edge, pinning his chest against steel framing. Continued rotation compressed his rib cage with increasing pressure, collapsing both lungs and preventing respiration. Internal bleeding began, as his chest and abdomen were crushed between moving and stationary components. The incident unfolded audibly on the live broadcast as the performance abruptly descended into chaos. The float continued rolling before the driver became aware and stopped the vehicle. Officials rushed to shut off generator power, but confusion over its location delayed shutdown for over 90 critical seconds. Graham was extracted once rotation stopped, showing no signs of respiration or consciousness. Emergency personnel reached the scene within minutes and attempted resuscitation procedures. However, Graham was pronounced dead from catastrophic crush injuries and traumatic asphyxia sustained during the incident. The broadcast ended immediately, and the remaining floats were diverted from the route. Investigation revealed safety violations, including inadequate cable management and absent emergency controls. New regulations required secured cables, minimum clearance standards, and mandatory inspections by certified technicians. The incident led to comprehensive safety protocol revisions, and Graham's family established a foundation promoting child safety and performances. It was October 2nd, 2015, in downtown Seattle's financial district. Overcast skies and a light drizzle left metal surfaces slick as a live urban scavenger hunt moved through alleys, stairwells, and temporarily accessible maintenance walkways as evening approached. Mercy Clack, a 34-year-old freelance graphic designer from Capitol Hill, checked her waterproof watch as she approached the next checkpoint. Standing 5 feet 6 inches with an athletic build developed through weekend hiking, Mercy had entered the competition seeking both the prize money and creative inspiration for her design work. Her competitive nature and attention to detail had served her well in previous challenges, keeping her near the front of the pack throughout the afternoon. The route included a temporarily cleared maintenance walkway that stretched between 2 office buildings approximately 32 feet above street level. Production staff had received permission to use the walkway for a limited time window, allowing contestants to access the final clue marker positioned at its midpoint. The metal grading surface, designed for utility access rather than foot traffic, had become increasingly slippery as the drizzle continued. Standard industrial railings ran along both sides, standing roughly 42 inches high, with a single mid-rail bar spanning each section. Mercy followed a camera operator who was documenting her progress toward the final checkpoint during a live broadcast segment. She had watched two other contestants cross the walkway at a jogging pace just minutes earlier without incident, and she maintained that same steady rhythm as she approached what seemed like the final obstacle between her and potential victory. The camera operator reached the walkway first and began filming as Mercy approached the entrance. She could see the clue marker ahead, positioned roughly halfway across the 40-foot span. The metal surface showed obvious signs of moisture accumulation, but the railings provided what appeared to be adequate safety barriers for the crossing. Mercy stepped onto the walkway while maintaining her jogging pace, eager to reach the clue before other contestants caught up. Her right foot contacted the damp metal grating and immediately lost traction. The slip occurred suddenly, sending her sideways and downward in a single motion toward the right side railing. Her hip struck the mid-rail bar first, pitching her forward and upward. Her upper body rotated over the top rail with enough momentum that she could not recover, her hands grasping at nothing as she tipped past the point of balance. The railing itself held firm and remained structurally intact, but it did nothing to stop the rotation carrying her over its edge. She dropped feet first initially, then rotated slightly during the 32-foot descent before striking the concrete sidewalk below. The fall occurred within view of the overhead camera during the live broadcast until the feed abruptly cut away as the operator moved to call for assistance. Crew members reached the street level within seconds of the impact. Mercy remained motionless on the sidewalk, and the first responders who arrived shortly after determined that moving her could cause additional injury. Emergency medical personnel arrived within minutes and immediately began assessment procedures. Despite their efforts, Mercy showed no signs of responsiveness. She was pronounced dead at the scene, with investigators later confirming that multiple blunt force injuries sustained during the fall had caused immediate fatal trauma. The medical examiner's report indicated that the height and nature of the impact had resulted in injuries incompatible with survival. The scavenger hunt was immediately halted, and all remaining contestants were notified of the incident. Production equipment was secured, and the walkway was closed pending a full safety investigation. Officials reviewed the temporary access permissions and found that proper protocols had been followed, though weather conditions had not been adequately considered. The investigation concluded that the combination of wet metal surfaces and Mercy's jogging pace had created the conditions for the fatal slip. Recommendations were made for enhanced weather protocols and surface treatments for future events involving elevated walkways. It was September 3, 2014. Downtown Cleveland was already warm by mid-morning, heat pressing against concrete and glass. The office tower on Euclid Avenue looked ordinary, its windows dulled by years of grime. Donna Whitlock arrived early, secured her harness, checked her lines, and started streaming before the city fully woke. Donna was 42, a union window cleaner with 17 years on high-rise crews across northern Ohio. She had started in her 20s, following an older cousin into the trade because it paid steadily and didn't require college debt. She was careful, methodical, and known among co-workers for refusing shortcuts. At home, she was a single mother raising a teenage son who had begun asking what her job actually involved. The live stream wasn't for fame, it was for him. She worked for a regional maintenance contractor that handled multiple downtown properties, many of them aging towers kept operational through deferred repairs. Inspection logs existed, but fixes were often postponed until failure. Dana understood the risks. She also understood pressure. Building management wanted the windows finished before a prospective tenant walked through later that week. Her union rep had raised concerns. The job went forward anyway. High-rise window cleaning depended on redundant rigging, a primary steel cable, and a secondary safety line anchored to rooftop davits. That morning, inspections showed corrosion and internal fatigue on the main cable. The backup line, recently reinstalled, had excess slack, reducing its ability to arrest a fall safely. The assignment that day involved the upper 20 floors, where exposure to wind and heat was more pronounced. Conditions were clear: but overnight thermal expansion had increased tension at the rooftop davits. As Dana descended, she felt a mild but unfamiliar sway in the platform when she shifted her weight. She paused, adjusted her stance, and continued working, the movement settling but not fully disappearing. Minutes later, as she repositioned again, the primary support cable failed. The break occurred at the anchor sleeve, where corrosion had weakened the internal strands beyond visible detection. The cable snapped without warning. Dana dropped suddenly, falling just over 3 floors before the secondary line engaged. Because the safety line carried excess slack, the arrest was abrupt. Her fall stopped within roughly 18 inches, forcing the line across her lower rib cage and abdomen under full body weight. The line did not cut. Instead, it acted as a rigid fulcrum, violently bending her torso forward. Her thoracic spine fractured and dislocated, severing the spinal cord and immediately eliminating muscle control and respiration. Her camera struck the glass and scraped downward before stopping. The live stream showed her body hanging motionless in the harness, folded forward over the line. There was no movement, no attempt to grab the rigging. Her head remained sharply flexed, consistent with catastrophic spinal disruption rather than laceration or decapitation. Emergency services were called within seconds. Another cleaner on a lower platform shouted her name but got no response. Emergency services arrived approximately 8 minutes later. Fire crews raised an aerial ladder, but there was no sign of life when they reached her. The coroner later explained the injuries in plain terms. The abrupt stop broke Dana's spine at the mid-chest level. The spinal cord was completely severed, eliminating breathing and voluntary movement instantly. Loss of consciousness would have occurred within seconds due to neurological shock. There was no evidence she experienced prolonged pain after the arrest. Internal organs showed displacement and bruising from extreme compression, but there were no defensive injuries and no signs of struggle. Death was immediate. The building closed for the rest of the day. Inspectors documented the corroded primary cable and improperly tensioned secondary line. The live stream footage, synced with security camera timestamps, showed the exact failure sequence from cable snap to arrest point. Months later, Dana's son testified in a civil case using the building's own maintenance records. The footage was entered as evidence. The tower eventually replaced all exterior rigging and revised its inspection intervals. It was July 18, 2016, in Cleveland, Ohio. A 6-alarm apartment fire burned upward through the morning, sirens steady, cameras already waiting below. Nothing suggested spectacle yet. From the street, the building remained intact as coverage continued. Marcus Levin was 34, a night shift HVAC technician who serviced grocery stores, clinics, and aging office buildings after hours. His work involved belts, coils, and keeping systems running quietly overnight. He usually worked alone, followed strict routines, and avoided attention. He lived alone in a mid-rise apartment and had mild asthma. His gray rescue cat was the reason he returned after the fire began. The fire started 2 floors below Marcus's unit due to an electrical failure inside a breaker panel. Smoke rose through the stairwell faster than flames, reducing oxygen on the upper floors first. By the time local stations cut to live coverage, firefighters were still staging outside and had not advanced hose lines to Marcus's floor. The live broadcast framed the building from street level. Anchors described smoke conditions while the camera held a wide shot of upper windows, a standard practice during multi-alarm fires to monitor fire spread. Residents were visible at several windows. The feed remained live and uninterrupted. Marcus entered the building during this window. Fire alarms were active. Some residents were evacuating downward, others hesitated, slowing clearance above the fire. Marcus reached his unit, closed the door, and placed towels at the base to slow the smoke. Inside, visibility dropped to inches. He searched briefly for the cat. Outside, the live camera continued rolling. Heat built behind interior walls, window glass softened in frames. Thermal imaging used by firefighters later showed ceiling temperatures inside Marcus's unit rising rapidly, weakening fixtures and igniting rollover conditions. On the live broadcast, a figure appeared at a 6th-floor window. Viewers saw Marcus force the window open and lean outward, shirt over his face. Flames rolled across the ceiling behind him, visible through the glass. The camera did not zoom. It remained wide as producers monitored multiple windows at once. Conditions inside became unsurvivable. As fire spread across the ceiling, Marcus climbed onto the windowsill. Soot patterns later showed sustained heat exposure rather than a slip. Blistering on his skin matched radiant heat injury before the fall, indicating prolonged exposure and limited time for escape. With the camera already live, viewers saw Marcus standing fully outside the window. Seconds later, his body dropped straight down through the frame. The fall was captured in real time. Rotation occurred once during descent, consistent with an uneven push from the sill. He struck the sidewalk at a steep angle, with force transferring through his body almost simultaneously. The impact caused catastrophic trauma and occurred entirely within the live shot. The camera shook briefly before the feed was cut as control room staff confirmed what had happened. Fire crews already operating at street level reached the sidewalk as part of ongoing suppression. The feed was cut shortly after. Marcus showed no movement. Medical assessment found no breathing or circulation. The coroner documented catastrophic axial trauma, including fractures to the lower extremities, pelvis, spine, and skull. The head injury occurred at impact, causing immediate loss of brain function and instantaneous death. Investigators later confirmed the electrical origin of the fire and ruled the death accidental. The cat was found alive under a couch during overhaul operations. The live broadcast footage was later restricted, but it had already aired, capturing the moment a routine fire update turned fatal in real time. It was July 19, 2018, when the closed test roadway in Nevada stretched across the desert landscape under a blazing afternoon sun with temperatures reaching 104 degrees Fahrenheit. The asphalt surface radiated heat waves that distorted the horizon, while the dry air carried the scent of sagebrush and hot concrete. The isolated facility featured a straight 2-mile section of track designed for high-speed automotive testing, bordered by sand barriers and ending with a concrete runoff wall. Brooks Day, a 29-year-old contract driver specializing in televised automotive demonstrations, prepared for his final run behind the wheel of a modified sports car equipped with aftermarket performance brakes. Known for his precise driving skills and calm demeanor under pressure, Brooks had built a reputation for executing challenging maneuvers safely while maintaining the dramatic visual appeal that television producers demanded. The demonstration vehicle featured high-performance brake components designed for short, high-intensity applications rather than sustained use. These racing-grade brakes generated extreme heat during operation and required adequate cool-down periods between runs to maintain proper function. However, the television production schedule had demanded multiple consecutive passes without sufficient time for the brake system to return to safe operating temperatures. Throughout the afternoon, Brooks had completed 6 demonstration runs, each involving acceleration to highway speeds, followed by emergency braking scenarios. The brake fluid temperatures had risen progressively with each pass, approaching the boiling point where the fluid would vaporize and create air bubbles in the hydraulic lines. This condition, caused by brake fluid boiling within the hydraulic system, would prevent the brake pedal from generating sufficient pressure to stop the vehicle effectively. The concrete barrier at the end of the test section stood 4 feet high and extended across the full width of the track, serving as a fixed boundary rather than a true high-speed stopping system. While effective for low-speed impacts, the barrier represented a potentially fatal obstacle for any vehicle approaching at highway speeds without adequate braking capability. As the final demonstration began, Brooks accelerated the vehicle past 90 miles per hour, while cameras positioned along the track captured the high-speed approach. The car moved smoothly down the center line of the asphalt surface as it reached the predetermined speed for the braking demonstration. When Brooks applied the brake pedal at the designated marker point, the overheated brake fluid boiled within the hydraulic lines, introducing compressible gas that prevented effective braking. The vapor lock condition prevented the brake system from generating the hydraulic pressure necessary to engage the brake pads. Despite Brooks pressing the pedal to the floor, the vehicle failed to decelerate significantly. The car continued at nearly full speed toward the concrete barrier, covering the remaining distance in seconds. Brooks attempted to steer away from the barrier, but the limited width of the track provided insufficient space for evasive maneuvering at that velocity. The vehicle struck the concrete wall head-on with tremendous force. The front structure of the car collapsed inward upon impact, absorbing some kinetic energy but transferring massive deceleration forces to the passenger compartment. The steering column was driven backward into Brooks's chest, while the dashboard compressed inward, crushing his legs beneath the twisted metal. The sudden deceleration caused severe internal organ rupture. Live cameras captured the moment of impact and the immediate stillness that followed inside the cabin. Smoke and steam rose from the crumpled vehicle as emergency crews rushed toward the crash site. Emergency responders worked for over an hour to extract Brooks from the severely damaged vehicle using specialized cutting tools. However, the massive trauma sustained during the impact had caused fatal injuries, including severe chest compression, multiple organ rupture, and catastrophic blood loss. Brooks was pronounced dead at the scene by emergency medical personnel. The live television broadcast immediately cut to black without commentary, and the production crew was instructed to cease all recording activities. The footage was immediately pulled from all rebroadcasts and internal archives. The subsequent investigation revealed that the brake system failure resulted from excessive heat buildup during repeated high-speed demonstrations without adequate cool-down periods. New industry protocols were introduced requiring mandatory cool-down intervals, thermal monitoring of brake systems, and strict limits on consecutive high-speed test runs during televised demonstrations. It was March 9, 2018, and the corporate conference center in Atlanta hummed with anticipation as industry professionals gathered for the annual product launch event. The main auditorium featured a raised demonstration stage, equipped with professional lighting and multiple camera angles for a live televised broadcast, with a simultaneous stream to remote attendees. Outside, a steady spring rain tapped against the floor-to-ceiling windows, but inside the climate-controlled environment maintained perfect conditions for the scheduled presentations. Kobe Prance, a 41-year-old technical presenter from Birmingham, reviewed his notes one final time as he prepared for the afternoon demonstration. Standing 6 feet 2 inches with graying temples that gave him an authoritative appearance, Kobe had spent 15 years explaining complex industrial equipment to diverse audiences. His methodical presentation style and deep technical knowledge had made him a sought-after demonstrator for product launches. The centerpiece of his demonstration was a new industrial device prototype featuring a sealed cylindrical chamber designed to showcase pressure tolerance capabilities. The unit stood approximately 4 feet tall and weighed roughly 200 pounds, positioned prominently at center stage. That morning, maintenance technicians had installed a replacement end cap seal to ensure optimal performance during the presentation, though the rush timeline had prevented the usual secondary pressure verification procedures. Kobe had originally planned a longer demonstration sequence, but broadcast scheduling requirements had compressed his segment to fit the available time slot. The audience of approximately 150 industry representatives filled the auditorium seats, while additional viewers watched through the live stream feed. He positioned himself directly beside the unit to provide clear sight lines for both the in-person audience and remote cameras. The demonstration began smoothly as Kobe explained the device's intended applications and safety features. He had performed similar presentations dozens of times, and his confidence showed as he guided the audience through each operational step. The cylindrical chamber was designed to handle significant internal pressure, making it an impressive showcase for the company's engineering capabilities. As the presentation progressed, Kobe initiated the pressure application sequence that would demonstrate the unit's tolerance capabilities. The chamber began building internal pressure according to the predetermined protocol, with digital readouts displaying the increasing values for audience reference. The chamber had reached operating pressures exceeding several thousand psi. Without warning, the recently installed end cap seal failed catastrophically. The cap separated from the chamber at high velocity, propelled by the sudden release of pressurized contents. The failure produced a sharp, explosive sound that echoed throughout the auditorium as the pressurized material vented instantly from the compromised chamber. The detached component struck Kobe in the upper torso and neck area with tremendous force. The impact knocked him backward several feet, and he collapsed immediately during the live broadcast, falling out of the camera frame as audience members reacted with shock and confusion. The live broadcast cut away moments later as venue staff rushed onto the stage. Venue staff and attendees reached Kobe within seconds of the incident. The malfunctioning device was immediately secured and powered down to prevent any additional hazards. Kobe remained motionless where he had fallen, showing no signs of responsiveness, despite the immediate attention from multiple people. Venue emergency responders reached Kobe within minutes and began assessment procedures. Despite their immediate intervention and continued resuscitation efforts, they were unable to detect any vital signs or restore normal physiological function. Kobe was pronounced dead at the scene, with investigators later determining that the high-velocity impact from the failed component had caused fatal trauma to his upper torso and neck region. The medical examiner confirmed that the force of the strike had resulted in injuries incompatible with survival. The product launch event was immediately suspended, and the demonstration area was secured pending investigation. Engineers examined the failed seal and determined that improper installation procedures, combined with the compressed timeline, had contributed to the catastrophic failure. It was March 22, 2019, in Boise, Idaho. Melting snow left damp concrete and cold air drifting into open garages. Kayla Jensen's garage door stood half raised for light. The quiet afternoon held only the scrape of rubber plates, a bar settling into steel, and the low hum of her phone streaming nearby. Kayla was 19, a first-year community college student balancing general education classes with part-time shifts at a local sporting goods store. She had found powerlifting during her senior year of high school after a physical therapy referral for a knee injury. The structure appealed to her. Numbers were honest. Bars either moved or they didn't. She trained alone most evenings, following programs she downloaded from small competitive lifting forums. Her stream existed for accountability more than attention. She averaged fewer than 20 viewers, most of them other amateur lifters checking her form between their own sets. She was registered for her first amateur meet scheduled 6 weeks out. Her coach, a volunteer strength instructor at the college gym, had advised conservative progression. That week, Kayla was behind. Midterms had cut into training time. She had also recently accepted a small discount partnership with a local supplement shop that reposted her clips, adding quiet pressure to show progress. The garage setup was basic: a steel power rack bolted to the slab, a barbell she'd owned since high school, mismatched plates collected over time, and no safety pins or spotter arms installed inside the rack. That afternoon, Kayla planned to test a new top weight on a back squat, not a deadlift. The temperature outside hovered just above freezing, making the concrete floor slick with condensation. She lifted without a spotter, something she had done dozens of times before. While loading the bar, she miscounted one side, adding an extra 5-pound plate to the left. The imbalance wasn't obvious once the collars were tightened. In chat, viewers noticed the load looked heavy and began counting reps aloud as she ducked under the bar. She unracked cleanly, the bar resting across her upper back just below the base of her neck, and stepped backward into position. The descent was controlled. At the bottom of the squat, her hips slowed. As she drove upward, her legs shook. At full extension, fatigue set in. The uneven load caused the bar to rotate and roll upward along her back. As she tried to recenter it, the bar slipped high and struck the back of her head at the base of the skull. Her neck snapped backward under the combined force of the shifting bar and her own body weight. The sudden hyperextension fractured the upper cervical spine instantly. Kayla dropped straight down. Her knees buckled and her torso collapsed without resistance. Her eyes remained open, unfocused. The bar slid free and crashed onto the concrete, bouncing once before settling. The sound echoed through the garage. There was no gasp, no attempt to brace, no movement afterward. The stream continued. Viewers typed her name repeatedly, assuming a failed rep. One viewer noticed her chest was not rising. Another suggested calling emergency services. A neighbor across the street, drawn by the sound of the dropped bar, stepped into the garage and froze. He called 911 within a minute. Paramedics arrived approximately 9 minutes later, finding no pulse and no spontaneous breathing. Given the obvious fatal trauma, resuscitation was not attempted. The coroner's report later listed the cause of death as a high cervical spine fracture with spinal cord transection. The injury occurred at the C2 level, immediately stopping breathing and consciousness. Death was instantaneous. There were no defensive injuries and no signs of prolonged suffering. The footage was reviewed by campus safety officers and her coach. The bar position, uneven loading, and absence of safety equipment were clearly visible on video. The college gym updated its policies the following semester, requiring spotters or safety pins for all heavy barbell lifts. Kayla's coach used still frames from the video during safety briefings, with her parents' permission, as a straightforward example of how quickly control can be lost and how little margin exists when lifting alone. It was May 14, 2015, when the suburban festival grounds in Ohio prepared for what should have been a routine outdoor broadcast. The morning air carried the scent of wet earth from overnight rain that had soaked the temporary staging area. Gray clouds lingered overhead, casting a muted light across the production setup where crews worked to finalize equipment placement. Silas Wood, a 42-year-old freelance stage technician, moved methodically between the steel truss supports, checking connections with the practiced efficiency of someone who had assembled countless temporary stages. Known among production crews for his reliability and no-nonsense approach to following orders, Silas had spent 15 years in the industry, taking contract work that kept him traveling between festivals, concerts, and broadcast events. His weathered hands showed the calluses of someone who worked with heavy equipment daily, and his quiet demeanor masked an acute attention to structural details that had kept him employed when others struggled to find consistent work. The temporary stage structure stretched 40 feet across, supported by a network of steel trusses and anchor points that had been installed the previous evening. 4 rear anchor plates secured the framework to the ground, though 2 anchor points were secured using temporary fasteners approved by a site supervisor after the specified locking hardware failed to arrive on schedule. The overnight rain had saturated the soil beneath multiple anchor points, creating conditions that would have warranted inspection under normal protocols. However, the tight broadcast schedule left no time for post-weather assessments. As the live broadcast commenced, Silas positioned himself near the rear support structure, monitoring equipment as cameras began their choreographed movements. The camera crane operator executed a scheduled lateral sweep across the stage. Introducing sustained side-loading forces, the compromised anchors were not rated to withstand under saturated soil conditions. The additional stress caused one rear anchor plate to shift in the softened soil, and its bolt sheared free with a metallic snap that echoed across the staging area. The sudden loss of support created an immediate imbalance that transferred the full structural load to the remaining 3 anchor points. Within moments, the compromised anchors began pulling loose in sequence, each failure increasing the stress on the remaining connections. The rear truss tilted forward at a steep angle, and 2 critical cross braces snapped under the redistributed weight. A steel lighting beam weighing well over 100 pounds broke free from its mounting and fell directly onto Silas, striking him across the upper back and shoulders. The impact drove him face down onto the stage deck with tremendous force. Before he could react, a second beam collapsed from above, landing across his torso and pinning his chest against the wooden platform. The weight compressed his rib cage inward, preventing his lungs from expanding properly. Additional lighting fixtures and rigging hardware continued falling, striking his legs and fracturing both femurs. The live broadcast cameras captured crew members fleeing the immediate area, their movements forming a chaotic scene that viewers witnessed in real time. Emergency responders arrived within 12 minutes of the initial collapse, but the positioning of the fallen beams created a complex extraction scenario. The primary beam across Silas's torso could not be safely lifted without heavy machinery, which was not immediately available on the festival grounds. Paramedics confirmed that he had sustained traumatic asphyxiation from the chest compression, along with multiple spinal fractures from the initial impact. Silas Wood was pronounced dead at the scene at 11:47 a.m. The broadcast had cut to a wide static shot during the collapse, then went off air entirely as the severity of the situation became apparent. The festival was canceled that afternoon, and the remaining stage structure was dismantled under careful supervision. The subsequent investigation revealed that the combination of inadequate hardware, saturated soil conditions, and sustained lateral loading introduced during routine camera crane operations had created a cascading failure scenario. The official report cited multiple safety protocol violations and recommended mandatory post-weather inspections for all temporary structures. The production company faced significant liability claims. It was November 26, 2015, in downtown St. Louis, Missouri. The morning air carried a damp chill, typical for late autumn in the Midwest. Overcast skies hung low over the staging area where parade floats lined up along a wide commercial street. The pavement glistened from earlier drizzle, and the faint smell of diesel exhaust mixed with the scent of wet asphalt. Crowds had already begun gathering behind metal barricades, bundled in coats and scarves, waiting for the Thanksgiving Day parade to begin. Camera crews positioned themselves at key intersections, preparing for the live broadcast that would reach thousands of households across the region. Elias Beck was 34 years old, a municipal maintenance contractor who was assigned to high visibility events because he knew how to keep things moving. Parade mornings ran on tight timelines, and delays reflected directly on the ground crew. That day, his role was to serve as safety marshal in the float staging area, signaling operators, watching clearances, and making sure vehicles stopped where they were supposed to. He wore a reflective vest over his work jacket and carried a two-way radio clipped to his belt. The staging zone sat on a slight downhill grade, roughly 2%, barely noticeable to the eye but enough to matter under certain conditions. Earlier that morning, a scheduling delay had pushed back the lineup by nearly 20 minutes. Floats that should have been secured and stationary were still being repositioned. Wheel chocks, normally placed immediately after parking, had been removed prematurely from several vehicles to allow for last-minute adjustments. One of the larger floats, a steel-framed structure weighing several tons, idled near the rear of the formation. Its engine rumbled steadily, vibrating through the chassis and into the damp pavement below. Elias stood directly behind it, facing the driver's side mirror, preparing to signal a full stop before the broadcast went live. The float began to roll backward. It happened slowly at first, almost imperceptibly, as the engine vibration and slope combined with a parking brake that had not been fully engaged and a transmission left in neutral to overcome the vehicle's hold on the wet surface. Elias noticed the movement and raised his hand, stepping closer to signal the driver. The rear axle struck him at knee height before he could move clear. Both legs fractured on impact, buckling beneath him as he fell backward onto the pavement. The rear frame continued its rearward drift, and the differential housing, a heavy cast iron component mounted low on the undercarriage, came down across his chest and abdomen. The weight was immediate and total. Severe thoracic compression from the float's weight prevented lung expansion and effective respiration. Witnesses standing near the barricades saw him become pinned beneath the float's rear section. The vehicle continued rolling another few feet before its front wheels struck the metal barricade, finally bringing it to a stop. Elias's boots remained visible beneath the frame, motionless. Operators shouted to kill the engines. The live camera feed, already rolling during parade coverage, showed crew members moving rapidly toward the float before the broadcast cut away. Elias lost the ability to breathe almost immediately and became unresponsive shortly afterward. Paramedics arrived within minutes, but were unable to access him until the float was carefully repositioned using a tow vehicle. By the time they reached him, there was no pulse and no respiration. The official cause of death was traumatic crush injuries resulting in respiratory failure. His chest cavity had been compressed beyond the point of recovery, and internal bleeding was extensive. The parade was halted, and the live broadcast cut to a standby screen after several seconds of unscheduled interruption. The staging area was sealed off as investigators documented the scene, measuring the grade of the roadway and examining the float's braking system. The float remained stationary over his body until emergency personnel could safely move it. Elias Beck was pronounced dead at the scene, his reflective vest still visible beneath the steel frame. It was March 9, 2014, in Des Moines, Iowa. A live charity telethon filled the hall with applause and lights. Nothing appeared wrong. Schedules were tight, queues rushed, and safety decisions were quietly bent to keep the broadcast moving forward, despite visible warning signs today. Lily Moreno was 11 years old. She was small, quiet, and consistent in training. She practiced 4 nights a week at a neighborhood dance and acrobatic studio that emphasized repetition and discipline, not aerial work. Her mother cleaned dental equipment overnight. Her father managed freight schedules. Performing felt like Lily's contribution. She focused on preparation, sewing costume details by hand, and meeting expectations rather than standing out. The studio owner encouraged Lily to appear at a regional charity telethon for exposure. Local sponsors covered travel and costumes, not equipment or safety setup. The Civic Arts Center was familiar but outdated. Lily had only performed aerial routines at low heights over mats, using temporary supports. She had never worked from fixed overhead rigging and relied entirely on instructors who said the setup was safe. On the morning of the telethon, the children's segment was pushed back several times as the schedule shifted. Donation totals were rising, and producers wanted to keep viewers watching through the later blocks. The aerial rigging arrived a few hours before broadcast. It was mounted into a ceiling truss designed for static lighting loads, not the dynamic forces created by a drop sequence. No load test was conducted. No structural engineer reviewed the installation. The anchor point was treated as adequate without verification, despite time pressure and the absence of load testing. Lily was moved to the final slot in the children's segment. This decision was made to maintain audience interest before a major donation update. Backstage, Lily prepared as usual. She chalked her hands and checked the borrowed silks. The anchor point was hidden above banners and stage lighting. No secondary attachment or backup line was visible in the performance area. There was no safety net beneath the rig. By the time Lily stepped onto the stage, the cameras were already live. She climbed smoothly. The silks responded as expected. Her movements were controlled and practiced. She reached the planned height, secured her wrap, and paused briefly before beginning the release. The move was designed to drop and stop mid-air, using friction and body position to control descent. Instead, the anchor failed immediately. The attachment pulled free from the truss without warning. Wood fibers tore as the improperly rated hardware pulled free from the structure under sudden load. The failure happened faster than any correction could occur. Lily fell nearly straight down, head first with minimal rotation. There was no meaningful deceleration before impact. The fall was captured by multiple fixed cameras. Her head struck the stage first. The force compressed her neck and drove her skull downward. Her body folded forward on impact and came to rest where it landed. Blood pooled beneath her head within seconds. There was no visible movement after impact. The silks fell beside her as the detached hardware hit the stage nearby. The broadcast feed cut shortly afterward. Access to the stage area was restricted. Event staff followed standard procedures used for medical emergencies during live programs. Lily showed no response during the assessment. Medical examination later confirmed the injuries were unsurvivable. The base of the skull was crushed on impact. Severe brain swelling was present. The bones of the neck were fractured from vertical compression. Breathing stopped at the moment of impact. The medical examiner ruled the death immediate. The center closed that night for inspection. Investigators documented improper anchoring, lack of redundancy, and the absence of engineering oversight. Records showed no verification of load ratings for the installed rigging and no approval process for aerial equipment. The telethon raised significant funds but permanently removed aerial acts from future programs. Local safety requirements for school and community venues were revised within months. Lily's parents settled civil claims without public statements. Settlement funds were directed toward mandatory rigging inspections for regional auditoriums. Lily's name now appears on safety checklists used before performances, attached to procedures meant to prevent another fall. It was November 18, 2020, in Ybor City, Tampa, Florida. The night was warm and crowded, music leaking from bars as pedestrians drifted between bright storefronts and unlit side streets. Luis Moreno walked with a phone strapped to his chest, speaking casually, unaware the live stream was approaching an irreversible end. Luis was 29 and worked delivery jobs for restaurants and pharmacies across Tampa. Streaming night walks supplemented his income and required little more than a phone, a stabilizer, and mobile data. He averaged 50 to 70 viewers, mostly regulars, and accepted small donations that allowed chat to choose his route. He avoided confrontation, crossed streets early, and ended streams if anything felt unsafe, a habit formed after witnessing minor altercations during earlier walks, keeping costs low and viewers comfortable during late hours most nights after work. His stream relied on real-time engagement, with donations steering his route block by block. A standard 2-second delay filtered technical issues, but offered no real-world protection. He carried spare batteries and monitored signal strength, following platform rules to maintain small sponsorships that provided visibility, not safety. That evening was busier than usual due to a midweek event. Partial street closures funneled pedestrians into narrower routes, increasing foot traffic in some areas while leaving others unexpectedly empty. Earlier, police advisories warned of disturbances after dark, including reports of armed robberies several blocks away. Luis mentioned the crowd on stream but continued, trusting familiarity with the area and the presence of nearby businesses still open with staff inside as a perceived buffer. As tips came in, viewers steered him toward quieter scenery. One donation redirected him down a side street with broken lighting and closely parked cars. Luis hesitated briefly, scanned ahead, and proceeded. The stream delay meant multiple warnings typed in. Chat had not yet reached his screen as he entered the darker block, where his footsteps echoed louder than the fading music behind him. City surveillance cameras covered the intersection ahead. A man stood partially hidden between parked vehicles, positioned near the driver's side door of a sedan, watching Luis approach. Several bystanders later reported noticing movement but assuming it was someone waiting for a ride. Luis continued narrating, eyes forward, pace unchanged as ambient noise dropped suddenly, and the street felt abruptly empty despite nightlife continuing less than 2 blocks away. The man stepped out and raised a handgun. 2 shots were fired in rapid succession. The first round entered Luis's upper right chest, puncturing the lung and causing it to collapse immediately, preventing normal breathing rather than stopping airflow entirely. The second struck the front of his neck, lacerating major blood vessels and destroying the airway. The sharp reports caused the camera to jolt violently as his body reacted reflexively. Luis dropped to his knees. He attempted to inhale, but could not draw air past the damaged airway. Blood poured from his neck and mouth, soaking the front of his hoodie. His hands moved weakly toward his throat, then slipped. He fell forward onto the pavement, camera still chest-mounted. The frame showed concrete inches from his face as blood spread rapidly beneath him. Muscle movement diminished within seconds as oxygen deprivation and blood loss progressed, and audio captured wet, choking sounds fading out. People on the next block heard the shots and ran toward the intersection. A nearby woman called emergency services within seconds. The shooter fled on foot. The stream continued briefly, broadcasting uninterrupted until the phone battery depleted. Police arrived approximately 4 minutes later, followed by paramedics, who found no intact airway to secure and severe external bleeding that could not be controlled in the field. He was pronounced dead at the scene. The medical examiner determined death resulted from rapid hemorrhage combined with complete airway destruction. Consciousness likely lasted between 10 and 15 seconds, consistent with witness accounts and footage. The chest wound alone may have been survivable with immediate trauma care, but the neck injury made survival impossible. Investigators used surveillance footage, dispatch timestamps, and archived chat logs to reconstruct the route. Viewers recognized the street from earlier streams and provided corroborating details. The shooter was identified and arrested within days after coordinated public tips. It was February 8, 2018, when the local television studio in California prepared for its evening newscast under controlled lighting and climate systems. The studio maintained 72 degrees Fahrenheit, with multiple cameras around a central news desk surrounded by decorative set pieces. Bright tungsten lights created the familiar warm glow of professional broadcasting, while technicians made final adjustments to equipment. June Miller, a 54-year-old veteran news anchor with over 2 decades of broadcast experience, reviewed her script notes at the main desk, while makeup artists supplied final touches. Known throughout the station for her calm professionalism and ability to handle breaking news with composure, June had built a reputation as someone who could maintain focus during technical difficulties. Her methodical approach had made her a trusted presence in the local market. The studio had recently undergone safety upgrades, including the installation of motorized smoke compartment fire doors designed to automatically seal sections during fire emergencies. These heavy steel doors used motor-assisted closure systems and were programmed to descend automatically when triggered by the building's alarm system. During recent maintenance work, technicians had improperly disabled the pressure reversal sensors that normally cause the doors to stop when encountering resistance. The evening's broadcast included a special segment featuring controlled flame effects as part of a cooking demonstration, requiring additional safety precautions and fire suppression equipment positioned nearby. However, the building's fire suppression systems had not undergone scheduled daily testing due to the live broadcast schedule. As the newscast began, June delivered opening headlines with characteristic poise, while cameras captured multiple angles of the studio environment. The cooking segment proceeded as planned, with small controlled flames demonstrating culinary techniques under what appeared to be safe conditions. During the demonstration, one controlled flame made contact with decorative fabric positioned too close to the cooking area. The synthetic material ignited rapidly, producing thick black smoke that began filling the immediate area around the news desk. The studio's smoke detection system activated within seconds, triggering automatic fire door closure sequence throughout the building. June immediately stood and moved away from the news desk as smoke continued spreading across the set. Behind her, one motorized fire door began its programmed descent from the ceiling, moving at approximately 6 inches per second toward the studio floor. The heavy steel door, weighing several hundred pounds, operated silently as it lowered. As June stepped backward to distance herself from spreading smoke, the descending door struck her across the upper back and shoulders. The impact forced her forward and downward, causing her to lose balance and fall face first toward the studio floor. The door continued its programmed descent without stopping, as disabled pressure sensors could not detect the obstruction. The lower edge of the descending fire door pinned her against the hard studio floor, its weight and continued assisted descent preventing relief once contact was made. The compression immediately restricted her airway and compromised cerebral blood flow, preventing effective breathing and circulation. Live cameras captured the emergency as crew members rushed toward the trapped anchor, attempting to manually lift the heavy door. Their efforts proved insufficient, while the assisted closure system remained engaged, and the door stayed firmly pressed against June's neck, despite multiple people attempting to raise it. Studio technicians worked frantically to locate power controls for the fire door system, but emergency procedures had not been clearly posted or practiced by the broadcast crew. After several minutes of searching, power was finally cut to the door motors, allowing the crew to manually raise the door and free June. June was unresponsive when removed from under the door, showing no signs of breathing or consciousness. Emergency medical personnel arrived within minutes and attempted resuscitation procedures, but she was pronounced dead at the scene. The official cause of death was determined to be traumatic neck compression and cerebral hypoxia, resulting from sustained pressure. The studio was immediately closed indefinitely pending a comprehensive safety investigation. The inquiry revealed that disabled pressure sensors had created a deadly hazard, and new regulations required multiple redundant safety systems for all motorized fire doors. The incident led to industry-wide reviews of emergency procedures and mandatory training for all broadcast personnel. It was October 18, 2017, inside a courthouse in Texas. Routine proceedings continued under fluorescent lights as a fixed courtroom camera transmitted the session live through a public access broadcast. Nothing initially set the day apart from any other on the docket. Cleo Banks was 52 years old, a civil defendant in a property dispute that had dragged on for nearly 18 months. 2 weeks earlier, she had asked the court for a medical delay, citing uncontrolled blood pressure and recurring severe headaches. The motion was denied due to previous continuances. She had worked in retail management before health issues forced an early retirement 3 years earlier. Those close to her knew she struggled with untreated hypertension, managing it inconsistently due to financial constraints and a distrust of medical intervention. That morning, she appeared in court anyway, seated at the defense table wearing a dark blazer, her posture upright but visibly tense. A court-appointed bailiff stood near the judge's bench, approximately 15 feet away. The courtroom's audio and video feed transmitted live and continuously to the public access broadcast. The judge addressed procedural matters from the bench, reviewing documents and making notations. Cleo remained seated, her hands folded on the table in front of her. Witnesses later reported that she appeared uncomfortable, but gave no verbal indication of distress. The proceedings continued without interruption for several minutes. The live camera angle captured the defense table in profile, showing Cleo's upper body and face clearly to viewers watching the public access broadcast. Without warning, while the courtroom feed aired live, Cleo's body stiffened. Her back arched slightly, and her hands gripped the edge of the table. A massive cerebral hemorrhage was later determined to have begun, blood vessels rupturing deep within her brain as pressure overwhelmed weakened arterial walls. Her face contorted briefly before her muscles lost coordination entirely. She slumped sideways in her chair, her body tilting at an awkward angle before gravity pulled her completely off the seat. She fell to the left, her head striking the sharp corner of the defense table before impacting the concrete floor. The impact was audible throughout the courtroom, a dull crack that caused immediate silence. Her skull likely fractured on contact, compounding the catastrophic damage already occurring inside her brain. Blood began pooling beneath her head almost immediately, spreading across the polished concrete in a dark stain. Her body convulsed involuntarily, limbs jerking in uncoordinated spasms as her nervous system misfired. The seizure activity lasted approximately 30 seconds before her body went completely still. Her eyes remained partially open, fixed and unresponsive. The bailiff moved toward her immediately, actions unfolding live on the public access broadcast as he called for medical assistance and knelt beside her. Other court personnel rushed to the scene, one attempting to check for a pulse, while another called emergency services. The judge ordered the courtroom cleared as the camera continued recording. EMTs arrived within 4 minutes. They found Cleo unresponsive with a faint, irregular pulse that rapidly deteriorated despite resuscitation efforts. Resuscitation protocols were initiated, but proved ineffective. The combination of massive internal bleeding and the secondary trauma from the fall had caused irreversible damage. Emergency responders transported Cleo Banks to a nearby hospital under critical condition. Despite aggressive intervention, she never regained consciousness. She was pronounced dead several hours later after physicians determined the extent of the cerebral hemorrhage and secondary head trauma was unsurvivable. A medical examination later confirmed the cause of death as a massive cerebral hemorrhage, with the fall inside the courtroom contributing fatal secondary injuries. Investigators noted that untreated hypertension likely weakened the blood vessels in her brain, making rupture more likely under stress. The live courtroom broadcast, which captured the collapse and emergency response, was preserved as part of the official record and later reviewed during an internal assessment of courtroom medical procedures. The civil case was formally dismissed in the days that followed. It was October 12, 2017, in a hillside barangay outside Cagayan de Oro, Philippines. A slow-moving tropical storm had parked over the region since dawn. Rain fell steadily, not violently, the kind that soaks the ground before anyone notices the danger building underneath. The area sat along a narrow road cut into a slope that had been reshaped years earlier to make space for small stores and homes. The hill above was a mix of clay soil and loose fill, held in place by shallow vegetation and aging concrete drains. Landslides were not unusual in the province, but this section had never failed before. The regional station sent a small crew to document flooding in low-lying neighborhoods. Maria Liza Santos, a 29-year-old reporter assigned to storm coverage, stood near a row of roadside stores that had pulled down their metal shutters. The live shot framed the road, the hillside, and water running through open gutters. The goal was to show conditions without moving into flooded zones. Several residents had gathered inside one corner store to stay out of the rain. The structure was a single-story concrete shell with a light steel roof, built directly against the slope. Its rear wall doubled as a retaining surface, though it had never been engineered for that role. Inside were Maribel de la Cruz, 41, Josephine Josie Ramirez, 38, and Ryan Flores, 15, all locals who lived uphill and had come down when the rain worsened. Rainfall records later showed accumulation exceeding safe limits for slope stability. Drainage channels above the road were clogged with debris, forcing water into the soil. The hillside began to saturate from the inside. There were no visible cracks or warning signs on the street. As the broadcast continued, the camera captured subtle movement along the hill face. A section near the top slumped first, sending a wave of mud downward. Within seconds, the entire slope released. Soil, rocks, and broken vegetation rushed toward the road, moving rapidly downslope. The slide struck the back of the store directly. The rear wall failed inward under pressure. The roof buckled and collapsed. The front of the structure remained briefly intact as the interior filled with debris. The camera view was partially obscured by dust and rain, but the collapse was clearly visible. Dela Cruz, Ramirez, and Flores were buried beneath a dense mix of wet soil, broken concrete, and roofing material. The debris settled quickly, compacting under its own weight. No voids remained large enough to allow airflow. The road disappeared beneath mud, cutting off immediate vehicle access. Emergency crews already operating in the area redirected toward the site. Excavation was slow due to unstable ground and continuing rainfall. Hand tools were used at first to avoid triggering further collapse. The buried section was reached after significant material had been removed. Medical assessment found no signs of breathing or circulation in all 3 victims. There were no major external injuries consistent with high-speed impact. Clothing and airways were packed with fine soil. The victims died from asphyxia secondary to traumatic burial caused by airway obstruction and thoracic compression. Post-mortem findings were consistent with mechanical asphyxia, where inhalation of soil and debris obstructed the upper airways, and external pressure on the chest wall prevented adequate lung expansion. This led to acute hypoxic respiratory failure, rapid loss of consciousness, and death within minutes due to oxygen deprivation. Santos and the camera operator were not physically injured. The live feed was terminated during the response and later reviewed by station management and authorities. The footage became part of the official incident record used by local disaster agencies. A geotechnical assessment concluded that prolonged rainfall, blocked drainage, and unreinforced slope modification caused the failure. The store had been constructed without a retaining wall or setback from the hillside. The slide originated above the structure and was not triggered by vibration or human activity at ground level. In the weeks that followed, the barangay cleared the area and relocated remaining residents from the slope. Local officials marked the zone as high risk and prohibited rebuilding along that stretch of road. The station revised its storm coverage guidelines to require a greater distance from hillsides and cut slopes during live reporting. It was May 14, 2016, and the outdoor fitness challenge set buzzed with activity under the late afternoon sun. Temporary staging had been erected on a parking lot in downtown Phoenix, where the asphalt radiated heat despite the approaching evening hours. Production crews worked around portable lighting rigs, while camera operators tested angles for the live broadcast segment. Sayer Quant, a 29-year-old fitness instructor from Scottsdale, adjusted his lifting belt as he surveyed the makeshift platform. Standing 6 feet tall and weighing 190 pounds, Sayer had built his reputation around high-repetition compound movements at his local training facility. His calm demeanor and methodical approach to lifting had earned him an invitation to a locally televised endurance challenge, where participants would attempt maximum repetitions under time pressure. The segment centered on a barbell challenge, using a standard Olympic bar loaded to 455 pounds. The production team had assembled a portable squat rack on the platform, with rear safety pins positioned to catch the bar should a rep fail. 2 production assistants, neither with formal spotting certification, positioned themselves at either end of the bar. The platform itself consisted of interlocking rubber panels laid over the asphalt, creating a slight seam where 2 sections met near the center. Sayer had completed his warm-up routine and felt confident about the weight. The challenge required maintaining proper form while cameras captured every repetition for the live audience. He approached the bar methodically, checking his foot placement and grip position as he had done countless times before. His years of training had taught him to respect heavy weights, but the television environment added an unfamiliar element of pressure and distraction. The first several repetitions proceeded smoothly. Sayer maintained his breathing pattern and kept the bar path consistent as the timer counted down. The production assistants flanked him, ready to assist if needed, while cameras captured the effort from multiple angles. Sweat began forming on his forehead as the repetitions accumulated, but his form remained solid. On what would become his final repetition, Sayer's right foot shifted slightly as it contacted the seam between platform panels. The movement was subtle but enough to alter his balance as he rose out of the squat with the weight still across his upper back. The bar began drifting forward across his shoulders, shifting his center of gravity beyond recovery. As Sayer attempted to correct the bar's position, the weight became unmanageable. The loaded barbell dropped unevenly off his shoulders, striking his upper chest and neck before the rear safety pins could fully engage. The left sleeve contacted the platform first, causing the assembly to twist and jam against the rack uprights, preventing a clean roll-off that might have reduced the impact. The production assistants immediately moved to lift the bar, but the 455-pound load exceeded their combined capacity, especially given the awkward angle created by the twisted assembly and the leverage disadvantage of working around the rack uprights. Sayer remained pinned beneath the weight, his torso compressed in a way that restricted normal chest expansion and breathing. Broadcast cameras maintained their wide shots as the incident unfolded live, before the control room cut to a static wide angle and then abruptly to commercial. The coordinated effort to remove the bar took approximately 2 minutes, during which time Sayer showed no signs of movement or response. When the weight was finally lifted clear, on-site medical personnel found Sayer unresponsive and not breathing effectively. Despite immediate resuscitation attempts, they were unable to restore normal circulation or respiratory function. He was pronounced dead at the scene, with investigators later determining that compressive chest trauma had led to cardiac arrest. The fitness challenge segment was immediately canceled mid-broadcast, with anchors later returning live to acknowledge a serious on-air emergency without further details, and the temporary set was cleared within hours. The incident prompted reviews of safety protocols for televised physical challenges, particularly regarding spotter qualifications and equipment positioning. Official reports confirmed that the platform seam and subsequent bar drift had initiated the sequence of events, though the ultimate cause of death remained the crushing force applied to Sayer's chest and neck region. Investigators later noted that improved platform preparation and properly trained spotters could have reduced the risk of the fatal outcome. It was August 12, 2018, inside a large entertainment venue along the Atlantic City boardwalk. Cameras were live as the finale of a nationally televised talent competition began. The stage was fitted with concealed flame jets for visual effects, with fire suppression systems zoned to activate only at extreme temperatures. Hugo Vane was 26 years old and had spent nearly a decade building toward this moment. Unlike other finalists, he wasn't chasing exposure alone. Hugo had turned down earlier touring contracts to refine a solo act that relied on timing, proximity, and controlled risk. Advancing to the finale meant visibility that could lock in a long-term residency, something producers had quietly hinted at during rehearsals. That afternoon, technical delays pushed the rehearsal schedule behind. To maintain broadcast timing, stage managers approved a late adjustment to the pyrotechnic sequence. One flame unit was repositioned slightly closer to the rear performance zone to tighten the visual framing for camera. Hugo was informed of the change but chose to proceed, believing the margin was still safe. Backing out at that stage could cost him the finale slot entirely. As the live countdown began, the audience rose to its feet. Hugo moved into position at center stage, 6 feet from the rear panel, closer than originally planned, but within the revised staging marks taped earlier that day. Behind him, flame jets armed automatically, their ignitions synced to the final musical beat. Lighting shifted to deep reds and amber tones. The music swelled. Stage crew monitored multiple cues simultaneously from the wings, their attention split across performers and broadcast timing. When the cue fired, one flame jet discharged incorrectly. Instead of projecting straight upward, the unit released a horizontal burst. Investigators would later determine the nozzle had been misaligned during recalibration, angling the flame bar toward the performance zone. Pressurized gas ignited instantly, sending fire across the stage at torso height. The flames struck Hugo's costume first. The synthetic fabric ignited immediately, fire racing across his chest and shoulders. Within seconds, the material melted and adhered to his skin, intensifying the burns. Dense black smoke rolled upward, visible on every live camera angle. Viewers watching at home saw Hugo stagger forward as flames climbed toward his neck. His airway was compromised almost instantly. Superheated air and toxic combustion gases entered his lungs, triggering rapid respiratory failure. He collapsed onto the stage floor while still burning, his movements slowing as oxygen deprivation set in. The broadcast audio captured audience screams as the live feed shook. Stage crew rushed forward with handheld extinguishers, discharging foam directly onto Hugo's body. The visible flames were suppressed, but smoke continued to rise from the charred fabric. Hugo showed no movement once the fire was out. The live broadcast cut away seconds later. On-site medical personnel reached the stage within 90 seconds. Hugo was conscious but in severe respiratory distress, struggling to breathe and coughing dark residue from his airway. Burns covered roughly 40% of his body, concentrated on the torso, neck, and upper arms. Oxygen was administered immediately as paramedics prepared him for transport. He was rushed to a regional burn center in critical condition. Doctors performed emergency intubation shortly after arrival, documenting extensive thermal damage to the upper airway and chemical injury to the lungs. Despite mechanical ventilation, his respiratory function continued to decline over the following hours as swelling and inflammation worsened, severely limiting oxygen exchange. Hugo died early the next morning from acute respiratory failure, complicated by systemic inflammatory response caused by the burns. A medical examination confirmed the cause of death as severe inhalation injury with delayed respiratory failure, with thermal burns listed as contributing factors. Investigators determined the pyrotechnic accident resulted from improper nozzle alignment during a last-minute recalibration, causing a flame jet to discharge horizontally into the performance zone. His costume fabric lacked flame retardant treatment, allowing rapid ignition and intensified smoke exposure. The competition was suspended immediately. All remaining broadcasts were canceled, and safety protocols for live pyrotechnics were later revised using the incident as a reference case. It was August 14, 2015, in downtown Milwaukee, Wisconsin. A street demonstration had escalated into scattered violence by early evening. Police lines shifted block by block while local stations stayed live. The assignment looked routine, but the street geometry, crowd flow, and fading light were already limiting control. Rachel Keegan was 32 years old, a general assignment reporter for a regional affiliate. She covered zoning hearings, winter storms, and school closures. Live shots were not her specialty, but staffing shortages put her in the field. She was careful, methodical, and relied on preparation rather than presence. Her employer expected continuous coverage. Advertisers had bought the hour. Producers wanted proximity without obstruction. Rachel wore a station-branded vest and held a wired microphone connected to a shoulder camera. She had no personal security. The setup relied on police maintaining distance between the press and the moving crowd. The disturbance centered on a four-way intersection bordered by closed storefronts and a bus shelter. Trash fires burned intermittently. Traffic signals failed. Officers redirected groups south, then west, creating cross-currents. Rachel was positioned near a curb cut to keep the camera stable and the background readable. Later reviews confirmed police radio traffic included reports of bladed weapons taken from nearby shops. The information did not reach the field crew in real time. Producers asked for a tighter shot as the crowd compressed behind Rachel. She stepped half a pace forward to keep the lens clear of passing bodies. The live broadcast shows a man emerging from the left edge of the frame. He wore a hooded jacket despite the heat and moved against the prevailing flow. His right arm stayed close to his body. He closed the distance quickly, visible across a few frames of footage, using the bus shelter as cover. The first contact was not a shove. The blade entered the left side of Rachel's neck just below the jawline. Review found the angle downward and inward consistent with a short thrust. The camera jolted as the operator lifted the rig. Blood appeared immediately, dark and forceful. Rachel dropped the microphone. She staggered backward 2 steps and collapsed onto the pavement. The assailant disengaged and ran north, visible for several frames before leaving view. The broadcast lag continued for 12 seconds, capturing Rachel supine and motionless as blood spread beneath her head. Police in the intersection reached her within moments as part of crowd control. The area was secured and the feed was cut at the control room. Paramedics arrived from a nearby post, initiated airway control, and applied pressure. But there was no effective response. Transport followed immediately under protocols. The medical examiner documented a penetrating neck wound that severed the carotid artery and damaged the jugular vein. The blade also nicked the cervical spine. Rapid blood loss caused loss of consciousness within seconds. Death occurred shortly thereafter despite immediate medical care. The suspect was arrested later that night using footage from multiple cameras and transit video. The knife was recovered in a drainage grate along the escape route. Charges included first-degree intentional homicide. An internal review found no violation of policy but identified gaps. Live positioning placed reporters at choke points without escape lanes. Audio delays prevented field crews from receiving threat updates. The station revised protocols to require standoff distances and hard-cut rules during crowd compression. City officials revised media access during unrest, clarifying permits and standardizing buffer zones. Stations added broadcast delays, fixed exit lanes, and new training on crowd movement and lighting. The footage remains a reference for newsroom risk reviews, with policy updates circulated statewide within months. It was August 6, 2016, at an industrial facility in suburban Detroit, where active machinery filled a sprawling factory floor as afternoon shift workers moved through marked walkways under harsh fluorescent lighting and constant mechanical noise. Zena Twelp, a 27-year-old production assistant from Ann Arbor, checked her clipboard as she prepared for the scheduled facility tour. Standing 5 feet 4 inches with shoulder-length brown hair, Zena had worked in television production for 3 years, specializing in coordinating live segments that required precise timing and guest management. Her meticulous attention to detail and calm demeanor under pressure had earned her assignments on increasingly complex broadcasts. The live tour was designed to showcase active manufacturing processes for a business program audience during a live televised broadcast. One particular machine featured exposed rotating components behind a partial safety guard, designed to allow visual access while maintaining basic protection. The equipment remained powered during the tour to demonstrate actual production capabilities, creating an authentic industrial atmosphere for viewers. Zena wore a standard wireless headset with a cable that ran from the earpiece down behind her neck to a transmitter clipped to her belt. The routing kept the wire out of her immediate field of vision while allowing freedom of movement around the production floor. Because the transmitter sat at her hip rather than her shoulder, the cable carried several inches of natural slack as it draped behind her neck and down her back, enough loose length to swing freely as she moved. She had positioned herself near the rotating machinery to ensure that tour participants remained within the camera frame during the segment. The tour group consisted of 6 business executives and 2 camera operators, all following a predetermined path through the facility. Zena's role involved managing guest positioning and providing silent cues to the host when timing adjustments were needed. The rotating machine continued its normal operation, with the exposed shaft spinning at approximately 180 revolutions per minute behind the partial guard. As the segment progressed, Zena monitored both the guest positions and the broadcast timing displayed on her handheld device. The tour was running slightly behind schedule, requiring subtle adjustments to keep the program on track. The host began explaining the machine's function to the tour group, gesturing toward the rotating components while maintaining a safe distance from the equipment. Xena stepped backward to signal a timing adjustment, moving closer to the machinery while keeping her attention focused on the guest positioning and camera angles. As she stepped back, the slack in the headset cable swung toward the exposed rotating shaft and made contact during the live broadcast. The cable immediately became entangled in the spinning component, the loose length wrapping and tightening around the shaft in a single rotation. The sudden tension pulled Xena toward the machine with tremendous force, faster than she could react or resist. The broadcast cut away moments later as crew members rushed to shut down the equipment. She struck the equipment housing and was forced against the rotating assembly before anyone could intervene. The mechanical force of the spinning shaft, combined with the cable's grip, created a situation that exceeded human strength to overcome. Crew members rushed toward the machine as soon as they realized what was happening. The equipment was shut down within seconds of the incident, but the damage had already occurred. Xena was freed from the machinery, but she showed no signs of responsiveness when the rotation stopped. The tour group was immediately evacuated from the area while crew members secured the scene. On-site medical personnel reached Xena within minutes of the incident. Despite immediate resuscitation attempts and continued medical intervention, they were unable to restore vital signs or detect any response to treatment. Xena was pronounced dead at the scene. The medical examiner later determined that the rapid entanglement had caused severe cervical spine fracture and traumatic vascular injury to the neck, injuries incompatible with survival regardless of the speed of medical response. The facility tour was immediately terminated, and the production area was secured pending investigation. Investigators examined the machine design and determined that the partial guard had not prevented cable entanglement with the rotating shaft. Official reports recommended enhanced safety protocols for filming near active machinery, including cable management systems and increased clearance distances. It was September 2, 2018, at Oceanside Pier, California. The segment aired live during a morning broadcast. Waves looked manageable on camera, sunlight flattening their edges. Framing suggested control, but shifting currents and tightening timing pushed a planned demonstration into open water risk before production adjusted positions while on-air coverage continued. Evan Cole was 27 years old, a volunteer EMT from Vista, California. He worked a warehouse job during the week and took unpaid EMT shifts on weekends to gain experience. He trained after work, kept certifications current, and swam regularly at a local pool. Supervisors described him as steady on routine calls. He followed rescue training videos and sought exposure for future fire department applications. He did not hold ocean rescue certification. The live segment was sponsored by a regional safety nonprofit and a surfwear company promoting beach awareness. Producers planned a brief rescue demonstration for the broadcast. The intent was to show how responders assist a swimmer in trouble, with Evan acting as the simulated distressed swimmer during the segment. He agreed after brief coordination with on-duty lifeguards. He did not disclose a history of asthma, and no briefing addressed how open ocean conditions differ from pool or shallow water drills. That morning, a beach hazard statement was posted. The statement warned of lateral rip currents near fixed coastal structures. From shore, conditions looked manageable. Skies were clear, winds light, and sets evenly spaced. Despite the statement, the live segment proceeded. The setup placed Evan beyond the sandbar to create visible distance. This removed firm footing and limited exits once cameras were live. Viewers watched Evan enter the water and swim outward as planned. As he crossed the sandbar, the wave height increased slightly. Live overhead shots showed his position shifting sideways, though forward motion continued. The drift was subtle in the air and became clear only later when compared to fixed landmarks. The broadcast continued without interruption. When Evan turned back toward shore, the current strengthened. On the live feed, his body moved diagonally while his overall position drifted toward the pier. His arms and legs remained active. He angled away, but the lateral pull continued. A larger wave lifted him. His feet lost contact. The wave carried him forward and sideways at once. The impact occurred at chest height against the pier pilings, visible on the live feed. His head struck the piling at an angle. The contact caused immediate loss of muscle control. Purposeful movement stopped. He did not regain the surface under his own power. Whitewater passed over him, pushing his torso against submerged pier pilings. Additional waves crossed the same area before access was possible. When Evan was moved clear of the pilings, there was no voluntary movement. Assessment showed no spontaneous breathing. He was stabilized on scene and transported under beach medical protocols already active for the live segment. The feed continued briefly due to control room delay and safety procedures before cutting. Later review confirmed a single head strike followed by loss of motion. The medical examiner documented a fracture at the base of the skull. The injury damaged the spinal cord, stopping breathing immediately. Loss of consciousness occurred at impact. Water in the lungs showed drowning followed by respiratory arrest, not preceding it. The injury pattern matched wave-driven impact with a fixed object, not exhaustion, cramping, or a medical episode. Afterward, Evan's EMT unit suspended water-based demonstrations. Training materials were revised to address rip currents, pier hazards, and authority to halt activities during advisories. The case was added to recertification training without identifying Evan by name. The program issued a safety notice and permanently removed the segment. Local agencies reviewed beach broadcast policies. Warning flags now remain in place during surf advisories regardless of filming activity. It was July 14, 2019 at Lake Havasu, Arizona. The sun was low, flattening the water into a dull copper sheet. Boats drifted farther out than usual, their motors idling as people gathered near the familiar cliff. The ledge was known locally for close calls and minor injuries, but serious incidents there were rarely documented. Marissa Cole was 31. She managed a lakefront bar 6 nights a week and taught yoga classes in borrowed studio space on weekday mornings. Her life was orderly and practical. She paid rent on time, rotated staff fairly, and stretched every morning before sunrise. She streamed occasionally from her phone, usually for regulars who asked what the lake looked like or wanted proof she was really off work. This time was different. She went live specifically to record the jump, setting the phone so viewers could see the ledge and the water below. She didn't chase viewers or sponsorships. Her only pressure came from herself, from wanting a quiet, definitive moment before summer slipped away. She knew the cliff and had jumped it twice years earlier when the lake was deeper. That summer, seasonal water releases downstream lowered the lake by about 34 inches. Old painted warning stones were exposed and scattered, no longer reliable markers. No signage had been updated. Locals adjusted quietly. Visitors didn't. That evening, Marissa titled the stream, "One Last Jump Before Sunset." The words were casual, almost apologetic. A few dozen viewers joined. Some typed warnings about water levels. Others asked her to angle the camera. She shrugged, smiling, saying she'd done this before. Heat fatigue and familiarity lowered her caution. She didn't test the water. She didn't climb down to visually check the depth. She adjusted the phone strap around her wrist and stepped forward. Wind came off the lake in short bursts. Boats drifted closer, their occupants watching. A pair of swimmers below waved, assuming she was jumping feet first. No one shouted a warning. She raised her arms, leaned, and dove cleanly, body straight and confident. From the cliff, it looked controlled. Less than a second after entering the water, the crown and upper forehead of her skull struck a submerged limestone shelf. The impact abruptly halted forward motion. Her neck hyperflexed, and the cervical spine failed at the base of the skull. The fracture began at the hairline and radiated backward as the skull compressed against immovable stone. The phone camera filled with bubbles, then a dense red plume of blood from scalp and nasal vessels. There was no kick, no thrashing. Loss of muscle control was immediate. Her body resurfaced face down within seconds, carried upward by displaced air in her lungs. The camera stayed live, half submerged, recording ripples and muffled shouts. 2 swimmers reached her first, flipping her over. Her eyes were open. There was no blinking or tracking. Blood streamed from her nose and scalp into the lake. Emergency services were called immediately. Witnesses pulled her toward the rocks, but she never responded. Rescue crews arrived about 11 minutes later and halted resuscitation due to obvious fatal injuries. The coroner ruled the death catastrophic head trauma with brainstem disruption at impact. Drowning was ruled out. The stream ended when a responder removed the phone from her wrist and set it aside. The footage circulated quietly among emergency workers before anyone else saw it, used briefly for internal incident review. The bar Marissa managed closed for 2 days. Staff left flowers along the back dock where she used to sit after closing. Locals placed painted rocks near the cliff to mark the new waterline, uneven but unmistakable. The county installed permanent depth signs the following month. They cited safety review requests prompted by responder footage. The lake stayed low. The cliff stayed the same. It was September 3rd, 2016, when the downtown high-rise district of a central Texas city basked under clear afternoon skies, with temperatures reaching 89 degrees Fahrenheit. The urban landscape stretched endlessly in all directions, punctuated by glass towers that reflected the intense sunlight. A gentle breeze moved between the buildings at street level, though it intensified considerably at higher elevations. Maynard Ford, a 35-year-old property marketing specialist, had built a reputation for opening his 14th floor apartment to local media crews seeking impressive skyline backdrops. His outgoing personality and willingness to accommodate last-minute filming requests made him a reliable contact for lifestyle segments and real estate features. Maynard took pride in his modern apartment's panoramic views and had hosted numerous interviews over the past 2 years. The apartment building had completed cosmetic balcony renovations 6 months earlier, focusing on aesthetic improvements rather than structural upgrades. The renovation crew had installed new decorative railings that appeared sturdy but were anchored into the building's outer fascia rather than the load-bearing concrete structure beneath. While the installation passed a limited visual inspection, it failed to meet load-bearing requirements specified by municipal building codes. The broadcast crew arrived that afternoon to film a segment about urban living trends, planning to capture Maynard against the expansive city skyline. The production team consisted of a camera operator, sound technician, and field reporter, none of whom performed safety assessments of the balcony structure. The interview setup positioned Maynard with his back toward the railing. As the live segment began, Maynard spoke enthusiastically about downtown development projects while gesturing toward various landmarks visible from his balcony. His animated presentation style involved frequent hand movements and occasional backward leans against the railing for emphasis. The metal barrier appeared solid and had supported similar contact during previous filming sessions. During a particularly expansive gesture about the city's growth potential, Maynard leaned backward against the railing with approximately 180 pounds of body weight. The decorative fascia, weakened by months of thermal expansion and contraction, split along the anchor points under the sudden load. The railing posts pulled free from their mounting holes with a sharp cracking sound. Maynard fell backward over the balcony edge, dropping through open air from the 14th floor. His body rotated during the 140-foot descent, striking a canvas awning on the 8th floor that altered his trajectory and caused him to tumble head downward. The impact with the awning lasted less than a second and failed to significantly reduce his downward velocity before he continued falling. He struck the concrete pavement head first with tremendous force, followed immediately by his torso and legs. The impact occurred directly within the field of view of a street-level camera positioned to capture establishing shots. The collision caused immediate skull fracture, cervical spine separation, and massive internal organ rupture. The street-level camera was part of the live broadcast feed, and viewers saw the fall before producers terminated the transmission. Pedestrians walking nearby ran toward the impact site as the broadcast audio cut abruptly, though the video feed continued for several additional seconds before terminating. Emergency responders arrived within 8 minutes, but paramedics confirmed that Maynard had died instantly upon impact. The building management immediately evacuated all residents from units with similar balcony configurations, pending a comprehensive structural inspection. The investigation revealed that 12 other units had identical railing installations with inadequate anchoring systems. The renovation contractor became the subject of a criminal negligence investigation. The official report concluded that the decorative fascia installation had created a false sense of security while providing no actual structural support. New city ordinances required all balcony railings to be anchored directly into load-bearing concrete. It was January 22, 2017, and the rocky coastline near Bar Harbor stretched under a gray winter sky as Atlantic swells rolled steadily toward shore. The temperature hovered around 6 degrees Fahrenheit, with a stiff onshore breeze carrying the salt spray inland. Tide charts indicated rising water levels throughout the afternoon, with swells averaging 6 to 8 feet as they crashed against the granite ledges that form the rugged shoreline. Drover Plint, a 52-year-old field correspondent from Portland, adjusted his wireless microphone as he surveyed the broadcast location. Standing 5 feet 10 inches, with weathered features that reflected 2 decades of outdoor reporting, Drover had built his reputation covering coastal weather events throughout New England. His calm demeanor and ability to convey complex meteorological information had made him a trusted voice during storm coverage. The segment was scheduled during the rising tide to capture the dramatic visual effect of waves striking the rocky shore. Drover had positioned himself on a granite shelf approximately 6 feet above the current sea level, providing what appeared to be a safe vantage point while maintaining proximity to the action below. The camera operator set up roughly 15 feet behind him on higher ground, ensuring both safety and optimal shot composition. The area featured no physical barriers between the shelf and the open water, as the natural rock formation had been carved by centuries of wave action. Drover had checked the tide tables and wave forecasts, noting the conditions fell within normal parameters for winter coastal reporting. His years of experience had taught him to respect the ocean's power while positioning himself for effective storytelling. The broadcast began with Drover explaining the meteorological conditions that were producing the impressive wave action. He remained stationary on the granite shelf, gesturing toward the water as he described the interaction between offshore winds and the incoming tide. The waves below continued their rhythmic assault on the rocks, sending occasional spray upward but not reaching his elevated position. As the segment progressed, the tide continued rising according to the predicted schedule. Drover maintained his professional delivery while the camera captured both his presentation and the dramatic backdrop of churning water below. A set wave nearly double the average height approached the rock face below Drover's position. The swell struck the granite ledge with considerably more force than the previous waves, sending a massive volume of water rebounding upward from the impact point. The rebounding water swept across the granite shelf where Drover stood, striking him with enough force to knock him off balance. The sudden deluge caught him completely off guard, and he was thrown sideways toward the edge of the shelf. His footing gave way on the wet granite surface, and he fell toward the churning water below. Drover struck the submerged rocks before entering the water, the impact occurring beneath the surface where the camera could not capture the details. The waves immediately engulfed the area where he had fallen, and he did not resurface in the immediate aftermath of the incident. The camera operator maintained the live feed for several seconds while backing away from the edge and calling for assistance before the broadcast was cut. Crew members attempted to locate Drover from their position on shore, but the turbulent water conditions and rocky terrain prevented immediate access to the impact area. Emergency responders arrived within minutes, but the combination of cold water temperature, wave action, and rocky underwater terrain created significant challenges for rescue operations. Drover was recovered from the water several minutes after the initial incident, but he showed no signs of responsiveness when brought to shore. He was pronounced dead at the scene, with the medical examiner later determining that blunt force trauma sustained during the impact with submerged rocks, combined with subsequent drowning, had caused his death. The investigation confirmed that the set wave had created conditions beyond the normal parameters for the location. The live coastal segment was immediately canceled, and broadcasting protocols for shoreline reporting were subsequently reviewed. Officials recommended enhanced safety measures, including physical barriers and revised positioning guidelines for future coastal broadcasts. It was June 3, 2017, outside Wichita, Kansas. A tornado watch was in effect as green-gray skies and strengthening winds swept the area. Gusts exceeded 50 miles per hour, while local television crews broadcast live from rural highway shoulders, tracking rapidly deteriorating storm conditions west of the city. Dorian Marsh was 41 years old, a freelance weather technician who took high-risk storm assignments because they paid more and led to repeat contracts. Severe weather days were when technicians proved their value. That afternoon, his job was to keep a temporary steel radar mast stable long enough for the live broadcast to continue, even as wind speeds began exceeding safe setup limits. The mast stood approximately 25 feet tall, constructed from tubular steel sections that connected at reinforced joints. It swayed visibly in the gusting wind, the movement becoming more pronounced as conditions worsened. Base anchors had been driven into the gravel earlier, but adjustments were needed as wind speeds exceeded initial forecasts. The broadcast schedule left little time for modifications, and the decision was made to proceed with coverage while making incremental improvements to the anchoring system. Dorian worked at the base of the mast, tightening guy wire connections and repositioning stakes to improve stability. The live camera feed shook intermittently as gusts hit the structure. The on-air meteorologist, positioned near the vehicle, urged the crew to wrap up the segment as wind speeds continued climbing. Debris began moving across the highway, small branches and loose gravel skittering past the equipment. The mast's upper section oscillated in a widening arc, the joints creaking audibly under the stress. Dorian remained focused on the anchoring work, his back to the wind, attempting to secure the base before the next transmission. A sudden gust, estimated later at 65 miles per hour, struck the mast from the side. The upper joint, already stressed from repeated flexing, failed catastrophically. The steel section buckled, and the top 15 feet of the structure collapsed downward and sideways. Viewers briefly saw the camera drop and the image break up before the broadcast was taken off air. The falling frame struck Dorian across his upper back and neck with the full weight of the steel assembly. The impact drove him forward onto the gravel, his thoracic spine fracturing instantly at multiple points. Severe internal injuries resulted as the mast came to rest across his torso, pinning him face down against the roadside shoulder. Crew members witnessed the collapse as the live feed jolted violently before cutting away. The mast section, weighing several hundred pounds, lay across his body from shoulder blades to lower back. They attempted to lift the steel frame, but found it difficult to maneuver without causing further injury. Dorian showed no movement and no response to verbal calls. His position, face down with the weight distributed across his spine, prevented any visible breathing motion. One crew member called emergency services, while others worked to carefully shift the mast off his body. By the time they succeeded in removing the steel frame, several minutes had passed. No pulse could be detected. Emergency responders arrived approximately 12 minutes after the initial call, delayed slightly by the deteriorating weather conditions and rural location. The official cause of death was determined to be a catastrophic spinal fracture with massive internal trauma resulting from the impact of the collapsing mast. The force caused catastrophic fractures to the upper thoracic spine with secondary cervical involvement, leading to immediate respiratory arrest. The live broadcast footage was later reviewed by investigators examining equipment safety protocols. Dorian Marsh was pronounced dead at the scene, his body remaining on the gravel shoulder until the medical examiner arrived nearly an hour later as the storm system moved east. The collapsed mast lay beside him, its failed joint clearly visible. It was April 9th, 2019, in downtown Newark, New Jersey. The morning rain had thinned to a steady drizzle, enough to darken pavement and soften sound. Traffic moved slowly. Umbrellas clustered near storefronts, and most people watched their footing without thinking about what might be missing beneath it. Tanya Brooks was 34 years old and worked as a retail visual merchandiser for regional clothing chains. Her job involved styling mannequins, coordinating seasonal displays, and advising store managers on layout. She streamed short city walks to get real-time feedback on outfits she assembled herself, treating it like a moving fitting room. She averaged a few dozen viewers, mostly other retail workers and fashion students. Tanya was cautious by nature. She avoided nightlife streams and never chased shock content. The platform occasionally promoted her streams under a local lifestyle category, and a small boutique brand had begun sending her discounted accessories in exchange for tags. Her setup was simple: a phone on a handheld stabilizer, a portable battery, and earbuds. She walked familiar routes and stayed aware of traffic signals and crowds. That afternoon, she planned a short walk between two shopping corridors, showing a rain-ready outfit she had assembled for spring inventory. The weather made the stream slightly riskier than usual, but she considered it manageable. Earlier that day, a municipal utility subcontractor had removed a manhole cover to access underground lines and left the site unattended. The opening was approximately 24 inches in diameter and over 12 feet deep. No barricades or cones were placed. Light rain collected on the sidewalk, turning patches of concrete into reflective pools. The open manhole blended into the dark surface, appearing no different than shallow water. Tanya read chat as she walked, responding to comments about fabric texture and shoe choice. Several viewers typed warnings about the dark patch ahead, noticing the absence of a visible rim or cover, but the stream delay meant she did not see them. As she approached the intersection, foot traffic thinned. A bus passed, spraying water across the curb. Her stabilizer dipped slightly as she adjusted her grip. She stepped forward mid-sentence, and her leading foot found no surface, causing her center of gravity to tip forward. She vanished from the frame in a straight vertical drop without any sign of slipping or scrambling. The phone dropped with her. The stream recorded a rapid rush of air followed by a single dull, hollow impact, echoing up the shaft as her body struck the concrete base head first with her neck flexed forward. The camera landed tilted against the wall, still streaming. Rainwater dripped steadily into the opening. Tanya did not move or make any sound. Witnesses called emergency services within seconds, reporting a fall into an open manhole with no movement visible below. The live stream continued uninterrupted, showing the concrete wall and falling rain. Emergency responders arrived approximately 5 minutes after the call. Firefighters descended using a ladder and confirmed she had no pulse. Paramedics performed a rapid assessment but did not initiate resuscitation due to the extent of visible head trauma. She was pronounced dead at the scene. The footage, combined with nearby traffic cameras, documented the fall clearly from start to finish. The medical examiner later reported extensive skull fractures involving the frontal and parietal bones, caused by direct impact with the concrete base. The force caused immediate brain swelling and massive internal bleeding incompatible with survival. Death occurred on impact, with no evidence of purposeful movement after the fall. The manhole was sealed that evening. Investigators confirmed it had been left open during routine maintenance with no barriers or warnings. The city later settled with Tanya's family, and the contractor's license was revoked after safety violations. Temporary barriers became mandatory for similar work sites. Thanks for watching. Want to watch more? Click on your screen now.